We've all had that one bright video game idea that no one has done before, which we wish we could bring to life. It can be an amazing storyline you thought of, or the next first-person shooter that would finally bury Call of Duty. But the question is, how far are we willing to go to turn our concepts into an actual game? What sacrifices are we willing to make for it, and how much time spent on it is too much? These are all questions that crossed my mind when I read the story of a young man named Spencer Yan, who developed interest in a small video game franchise called Hotline Miami, and tried to make his own game based off of it. Sadly, Spencer wasn't prepared to handle the challenges he was going to face. If you have been a follower of my content, you'd know that my videos are usually very lighthearted with tons of jokes peppered in. But today's subject isn't a laughing matter, and I think it needs to be treated with the seriousness it deserves. Before we start, make sure to subscribe, click the like button and even the join button for access to exclusive perks for $3.99 a month. Also, I got a Discord server now. Make sure to check it out and even join the server if you're interested in my content and want to share your thoughts about my videos with me, or even just spend some time and relax with other people within my community. Hotline Miami is a franchise that needs no introduction. Developed by Denton Studio, consisting of only two men, Jonathan Soderstrom and Dennis Vedin, Hotline Miami became an indie hit because of its amazing visuals, gameplay, soundtracks, and story. I won't go too much into Hotline Miami itself, but if you're interested, you can check out my Hotline Miami playlist and learn all there is to the game. After the sequel, titled Wrong Number, Denton announced there will never be a third installment in the franchise, which was very sad news for the fanbase, but I personally think it was the right call because everything in the game was wrapped up and making a third game would just feel like they're milking it. But the developers didn't exactly leave the players with nothing. A little more than a year after release, Hotline Miami 2 got a level editor mode where the players got to create their own Hotline Miami 3 using all of game's assets. So the players got to work. While most of the community levels were just for goof and a joke, some were taken seriously and turned into actual deep stories. The main problem with the level editor was that it was obviously limited to Hotline Miami's mechanics. You couldn't really add anything that wasn't already in the game, and some people in the community wanted to improve over the original game. So they started their own projects outside of the editor from scratch. One of the famous ones that comes to mind is a game called Ocho made by Nathan Haddock. Though Nathan never explicitly stated that he made Ocho because he wanted an improved Hotline Miami, it's an easy conclusion to come to once you try the game. In between these creators was the barely 18-year-old Spencer Yan, who was in love with Hotline Miami and decided to create his own variation of it. I should add a disclaimer here that the information presented from this point onward is gathered bit by bit from different parts of the internet. Since there is no official documentary of Spencer's project, I had to gather whatever I could from whoever and wherever I could, then simply line them up to try my best in creating a timeline out of parts that don't contradict each other. All of my sources will be in the description. There is a very high chance that at least a small portion of info in this video is inaccurate, so in the case that you're aware of a specific bit of information that I didn't mention or got wrong, please correct me in the comment section. Not much information is available about Spencer's work before this project, since he doesn't have a wiki page nor do people talk about him a lot, but judging from the quality of his work which we will see, it definitely wasn't the first time he was working on a video game. Spencer would work on his own Hotline Miami as a private project that was never intended to go public, but seeing the demand for a third game within the community, he realized that the game can potentially be successful enough to make a name for him. After all, his dream was to work as a system designer for Ubisoft in the future, and designing a successful game would make a pretty good resume for him. Fortunately for Spencer, Denton Studios has always been very supportive of people creating their own Hotline Miamis. So when Spencer reached out to them asking if he can have access to the source code of Hotline Miami to make his own successor, they gave it to him, only asking him to not sell the game, which he followed through. In 2015, Spencer would announce the creation of Midnight Animal, a Hotline Miami Miami-inspired indie game that would become a spiritual successor to the franchise. The name Midnight Animal was taken from the pilot of Hotline Miami 2. Interestingly enough, there is a drink in Ocho that references Spencer's Midnight Animal, apparently because Spencer helped out a little bit in creating Ocho. The announcement video, which is removed now, got near 50,000 views. Not a huge number by YouTube standards, but it did manage to turn the heads of Hotline Miami fans. It was an impressive feat to get the support of most of the community. Of course, negative comments will always be there no matter what subject you post on the internet, but the positive ones drown them for now. And Spencer, seeing the demand for his game grow more by the day, officially started developing Midnight Animal. Not much was known about Spencer's game outside of the trailer, but he was in touch with members of the community, prominently through a Hotline Miami subreddit. And through the information they exchanged, Spencer described the basic premise of Midnight Animal. The plot takes place after the events of the second game, where the extreme patriotic organization of 50 Blessings is stronger than ever. The story was going to take place in a location other than Miami, since Miami doesn't exist anymore. You take control of a 50 Blessings operative named John, who took up their killing contracts until eventually he decides to betray them. A basic premise that's easy to get into. It might not seem special, but the protagonist, John, was going to do something that none of Hotline Miami protagonists have done, betraying 50 Blessings. Though Spencer would go on to say that he didn't intend Midnight Animal to be taken as Hotline Miami 3, and I personally think he more so wanted Midnight Animal to be taken as a Hotline Miami inspired game that is to be set in the same universe as the original ones. He did, however, acknowledge that marketing his mod as a successor of the franchise would bring him clout. I suppose on some level, I definitely should take a lot of responsibility for, however, unintentionally cultivating that image of myself. Midnight Animal got a green light and was put on Steam that made even more people take notice of it. It's worth mentioning that the mod was also announced to be free, given that Denathan requested it to be. This was also a massive booster for Midnight Animal. Spencer was officially on the peak of his popularity. The community were fully supportive of him, and even the developers have taken notice of his work. Unfortunately, however, things never go as smoothly as we plan for them. Spencer would make a now removed post on June announcing that Midnight Animal would be delayed indefinitely due to him going through some personal problems at the time. The Hotline Miami community was for the most part supportive and allowed him to take his time. I had no idea how to communicate with a mass audience. Although the Greenlight campaign was by all means an overwhelming success, I started to feel really uncomfortable about it around then. It wasn't just the comments telling me how lazy my work was or how shitty and ill-informed my design decisions were. It was also random people contacting me and asking me about providing music or having to seriously begin messaging record tables. Many of them pretty well established. Having to deal with their management trying to explain to them what I was making, that it wasn't commercial, that I had no income whatsoever and was just some random kid working on this thing because he liked it. It appears as though the negative comments were becoming more visible for Spencer to take notice. Although the factors Spencer mentions can put a lot of stress on a single person, it was far from over. Spencer recently failed his first college semester, which costed him the scholarship that he would use as a shield against his parents to cut off his financial support if he was to take classes on something quote-unquote useless. The extreme pressure from every direction in life has escalated into Spencer losing touch with most of his friends and the breakdown of a serious romantic relationship, to the point that sadly Spencer tried to take the easy way out multiple times. Spencer wouldn't even touch Midnight Animal for 5 whole months, and at the height of his depression he played Persona 4. It absolutely shook me. At this point, Spencer was living in complete isolation. He didn't have any friends or companions to spend time with, and the only times he would leave his house was in early morning to get himself some food. And as we have seen time after time, lack of socialization combined with anime never turns out good, because we tend to become more and more deprived of emotions as we don't express them often or at all. When we are presented anime with its exaggerated interactions and emotions, we find interest and associate anime with those social interactions we are deprived of that would have brought us joy, which make us want to include it more into our lives. This isn't just the case for anime. In general, it's possible that someone who doesn't have much social interactions takes interest in fictional ones, and over time gravitate towards them rather than real ones, because they are much more accessible and easier to get. Obviously, taking interest in relationships between fictional characters isn't necessarily exclusive to people who are deprived of social interactions. You can be a perfectly social and outgoing person and still find interest in relationships between these characters. But it seems as though people who are socially deprived of interactions take interest in these relationships to an extreme amount, most likely because they want to experience it themselves. Unsurprisingly, the emotional forcefulness of Persona 4 had a major impact on him. All of a sudden, compared to the profound positivity Persona offered, my work, bleak and hopeless, a total reflection of my state of mind at the time, seemed totally impotent. I felt ashamed of it. Persona 4 eventually led Spencer to Persona 5, where characters attempting to free themselves from negativity resonated with him just as strongly. Everything that happened to Spencer, his isolation, loneliness, the breakup, the insane pressure of Midnight Animal, and the sheer positivity of Persona games, all mixed in a bowl, gave birth to a new Spencer. Suddenly, it didn't matter so much to me that I was making a Hotline Miami mod. I saw it more as, this is my project and this is how I'm dealing with the world. This is how the world will see me. Persona affected me deeply, almost as much as Hotline Miami did. It seemed only appropriate that my work should pay testament to both. This was unfortunately where Spencer's downfall officially started. Though he was still struggling with the many life problems, it wasn't until now that he started to lose his reputation amongst the Hotline Miami fanbase, the only bit of support he had left in his isolated life because of his terrible game design choices. Spencer tried to turn Midnight Animal into a love letter for two of his favorite game franchises, Hotline Miami and Persona, instead of going forward with the game he promised Hotline Miami fans he would make. After multiple nights of virtually no sleep, Spencer would finally release an update to Midnight Animal, after which he would leave his dorm to get some fresh air. It was the first time after a while that Spencer finally felt like he accomplished something important. Unfortunately, this feeling of joy was very short-lived. It only took 20 minutes for Spencer to return to his dorm, only to read the barrage of negative backlash the new update has received due to the drastic changes to what the previous version was. Midnight Animal was now titled Midnight Animal, a story of love and forgetting. Spencer said that the story was now quote-unquote effectively the same, but with more focus on consequences of violence on mental health and the importance of friends as a support system. The combat sections were still intact, but they will be taking a back seat to let the life sim elements shine. It goes without saying that all of these new elements were taken straight from Persona games, and Midnight Animal has now turned into a mixed bowl of Hotline Miami and Persona. Needless to say, the majority of Hotline Miami fans didn't take this well. After all, what would you do if you opened up a game you were eager to play, only to see that not only did it turn into something out of an anime, all of the character models were also redesigned to look like anime characters. For the next few months, both the Steam forums of Midnight Animal and Spencer's inbox were filled with negative comments, some of which would go into darker side of gaming community. Though the backlash was pretty extreme, you wouldn't expect people to be this angry over something that was being made entirely for free. It was essentially a free Hotline Miami successor, even if it was now mixed with anime. That's because even though Midnight Animal was free, Spencer wasn't working for free. According to an article on Indie Hellzone, Spencer Spencer had a Patreon account, and many of people who were now criticizing this new version of the game were monetarily supporting Spencer. The peer pressure of the negative comments forced Spencer to make the terrible decision of opening up to people about the personal struggles he was going through, as an attempt to justify the changes he made to Midnight Animal. His openness was obviously also used against him. Every single morning I'd wake up and the first thing I'd see when I checked my inbox was a whole litany of messages telling me how much of a f***ing disappointment I was, and that I should myself, and my girlfriend left me because I was a beta of But even worse, the Hotline Miami fanbase wasn't the only one mad at Spencer. It didn't take long for people to notice that the new character designs of Midnight Animal were traced from Persona characters. The most noticeable one being John, the protagonist of Midnight Animal, being now a traced version of Persona 5 character Goro Akechi. Spencer's response to the outrage was that he simply wanted to pay homage to his influences, which did little to suppress the now even more angry fans. As Midnight Animal's new character designs eventually found their way from Reddit to 4chan. For those of you who are blessed enough not to know about 4chan, it's a place which makes Reddit look like child's play. In addition to Hotline Miami fans, Persona fans were now also against Spencer. Hotline Miami fans because Spencer didn't make the game he promised he would, and Persona fans because Spencer stole the characters of their beloved franchise. One of the moderators of r/Hotline Miami, nicknamed PI0H1, goes on to tell Spencer, "So now you've got two communities that have never interacted with each other, the Hotline Miami community and the Persona community, just hating over the game for different reasons." Spencer had officially gone from being a favorite within the Hotline Miami fanbase to directly opposing them and Persona fans. At this point, Spencer and the forums were completely against each other. The community comments had gone far past criticism and turned into racist death threats. The best action you can take in response to these type of comments is to either delete them and block the user or ignore them, because in the majority of cases, none of these threats would actually turn into reality, and in the case that it did, you should contact authorities. Spencer, however, decided that the best response to these insults is insulting back, and responded with very strong language, though he would later on go on to apologize and claim he had no excuse for them. "Along the way, I got pretty burned out and said some pretty offensive things which I now deeply regret, and those too were dug up and added as fuel to the rage. The end result was this thing I had thought was my highest point as both a developer and as a person in general turned out to literally be devastating." But the damage was already done, because Spencer's comments are exactly what they were looking for. It's very common for these so-called trolls to do whatever they can in order to get a reaction out of a known figure, because what they do would fly under the radar since no one really knows them, but the figure's response wouldn't. Though Spencer was now officially on the lowest point of his journey, the story of Midnight Animal doesn't end here. At this point, Spencer had graduated and was unemployed. Since he didn't exactly have any plans for his future, he decided to seriously get back to work. Spencer goes on to separate Midnight Animal, or at least whatever he made of it so far, into two separate files. The exegesis of John the Martyr, which went into the narrative elements, and the document of Midnight Animal, which was an open-ended sandbox platform. These two demos are publicly available to download and play, and I did download them. Let's just say that they're not that good. I'll start with the document of Midnight Animal, since this is what the game was supposed to be at the start, or at least contains some of it. It opens up to one of the ugliest looking title screens I have ever seen, and I'm sure it could have been done a lot better. The game sends you right into John's house with a PC you can interact with. You can select contract, go out with a friend, and the third option is just blocked. If you click on the third option, Yeah. So if you pick select contract, you have the option of 3 different level demos. They aren't that different from one another, but I'm not expecting much from a demo. Starting each level, you see John take the public transport to the level location. A bit of a unique difference from Hotline Miami protagonists always taking the car. Oh, actually never mind, John's car is there. I don't know what that was about. The game is a lot darker compared to Hotline Miami. It's Hotline Miami but with a lot of edge. It's hard to get a grip on the gameplay. Kind of hard to describe, but it feels like the enemies kill you much faster than they could in Hotline Miami. Spencer added this screen shake effect to the game to kinda make guns feel impactful and simulate gun kick, which gets old really fast and ends up making you lose focus and even gives you motion sickness after a while. But the worst part about it is the fact that you can reload guns infinitely. Every time you pick a gun, you basically never have to change it. Hotline Miami didn't have the option to reload, because you picked guns from the ground, not their mags. Ocho added reloading, but limited it to only once, which still forced you to switch guns. But in Midnight Animal, there is no tension. I don't care if I miss a shot. Most of the time, I can just hold down the fire button and never take my finger off. Oh, and reloading the shotgun will crash the game every time. Interestingly, there is a vending machine you can interact with and buy soda from in one of the levels, which makes me think if Spencer was planning to make levels intractable in the full game. Another odd thing about the levels is the soundtrack. Hotline Miami has always been known for its fantastic choice of synthwave music that fits perfectly in the world of the game. The music of Midnight Animal was just off. It didn't exactly fit into what was going on. A user nicknamed Freedom Fallout on Hotline Miami subreddit compiled the soundtracks, and it's a very weird set. One song is cheerful Billy Ocean and it's followed up by some anime music. To make it even worse, the music isn't set to a level, it's randomized, meaning none of the musics were picked specifically to set the scene for the level. It was just background music. Aside from picking contracts, another option you have is going out with a friend, your only friend being Nicole apparently. You meet her in a bar and exchange masterpiece dialogues such as, "I took something similar to the drug, and let's say that I'm feeling ethereal, like I can't be killed. Plus, whenever I'm trying to do contract, I always end up waking up in my apartment without remembering anything. Don't understand me wrong, but even I don't know what can be a reason of this. Interesting. Way more than interesting. I think I should contact with a person who gave this to me." Obviously, there is no plot context to anything that is being said, so basically nothing in the document of Midnight Animal makes any sense, which is where the exegesis of John the Martyr comes into play. Even though most people weren't a fan of the life sim elements, I still went in with an open mind, and I hated it. Not because of the fact that they exist, but because Spencer executed it very poorly. The exegesis of John the Martyr, what kind of title even is that? I'm just going to call it the visual novel from now on, because that is exactly what it is. This is a visual novel, even though Spencer would try his best to cover this for whatever reason, instead of addressing it by calling it a literary event than a ludic one. This is just a visual novel in Hotline Miami style, which might not sound so bad, but Spencer decided to tell the player about anything and everything rather than showing them, meaning the characters would go on to explain literally every single bit of detail to the player rather than letting them figure at least some things out on their own, leading to dialogues that just don't end, and in a lot of instances just discussing stuff that don't matter at all. Okay, this is getting ridiculous at this point. I'm just going to fast forward. Bro. Oh my god. Bro! Dude, oh my god, I don't care! Bro, stop! Don't get me wrong, I love visual novels, but Spencer doesn't seem to take advantage of the visual element at all, which is used to show a lot of stuff to the player rather than tell them. A useful tool that normal novels, which are just books, don't have, because there is no visualization and usually just text. Here's where things get a little confusing. Some of you who have been informed about Midnight Animal before watching this video may remember the document of Midnight Animal being this version instead, not the one I just presented you with. And you're probably wondering what's going on here. Well, to make it simple, this version of the document is also available in the files. It's just that Spencer claims this isn't for us, which is very strange because this is a lot more polished compared to the document that was intended for us. I tried my best to figure out what's going on and, well, obviously there isn't that much info available on a lackluster third-party mod made for a niche indie game. The best I could come up with is that this was purely for Spencer to test out some features before implementing them into the version that is supposedly intended for us. But for now, that's all we really have of Midnight Animal. Spencer was hoping that these projects would eventually become part of something bigger, but before we could get to that, Spencer gave up. Spencer was able to fight his way through most of his life struggles so far, even if his own choices were the results of a lot of them. But he couldn't take it anymore. We don't exactly know what was the struggle that broke the camel's back, we just know that one day he decided he was done with Midnight Animal, making everything he went through till now quite pointless. In the upcoming months, Spencer would visit Hotline Miami subreddit often. Another content creator with whom I've shared a fairly tense history due to philosophical disagreements made a post essentially asking why aren't there any new ideas or innovations in mods. The comments, all from his circle of friends, posted some ideas that sounded vaguely familiar. Boss fights, extensive environmental destruction, health systems, different objectives, dynamic lighting, ad nauseum. In short, without fail, they were things that I had attempted and mostly succeeded at implementing in my own work months, if not years ago. The fact that people wouldn't bring up Midnight Animal when presented with ideas like this made Spencer think that his work was quote-unquote an unmentionable failure, which finally brought Spencer to the realization that him giving up made his work lost time. Spencer would join online communities of game makers and visual novel designers. He wanted to help them, but he was scared of letting them know who he was. My friends had not even graduated yet. I watched as they were summarily picked up by tech films and hedge funds who paid more in signing and relocation bonuses than I'll probably ever make in my entire life. I wasn't taken seriously by anyone. To other developers, I was just some amateur modder working with some niche 2D game, and to non-developers, my work, utterly lacking in commercial value or potential, was at best a frivolous hobby that was taking too much time and effort. It wasn't that I felt particularly like an imposter or a fraud, I just felt like a fucking failure. At the end of the story, Spencer was left much worse than where he was at the beginning. Alone, isolated, without a job or really anything to look forward to, all because he sacrificed everything for a dream which he couldn't follow through. Did he deserve the backlash he received? Not entirely. Spencer was a guy who was dealt a shitty hand, and on top of it, made bad decisions too. The world of content creation is a very lonely one. I know it because I live in it too. So it's very important to balance out your work with other stuff in your life to not overwhelm yourself. Spencer didn't try to, since he believed that he was on a timer. Prioritizing his work over everything else is what led to his isolation, which led to his mental state deteriorating and eventually to him making bad decisions. I, however, believe Spencer's worst decisions weren't adding story elements that people didn't ask for, or tracing over persona characters, or insulting back the community. His worst decisions were making a promise he couldn't follow through and not finishing what he started. No one forced him to make Midnight Animal. He started it as a passion project, but then he made it public and promised people who supported him he would make something, only for him to go on to make something else. Similar to Spencer is the story of another indie game developer named Justin Stander, who created the masterpiece called Katana Zero. I already covered that game, so if you're interested about the details, give it a watch. But what you should know now is that Justin also went through major difficulties in his journey of making Katana Zero. But he finished what he started, and he created what he said he would. Most importantly, he did not let the pressure from every aspect of life to break him, like Spencer did. I would like to end my video the same way the the article on Eurogamer ends, given that it was my primary source for this video. There's a recurring dream sequence in Hotline Miami 1, where one of the protagonists of the game, Jacket, talks to 3 masked figures, one of which is a woman with a horse mask named Don Juan, who goes on to tell Jacket,
"No matter who you are, bearing too much weight inevitably leads to the collapse of everything.